Those of you who are following these series will find that I'm dealing with a specific subject. And yes, I may have to return marginally to some things I've already said, but it's all part of the wider picture that what I'm trying to deal with in this series is, I'm talking about faith, but I'm trying to deal with it from a different aspect, not just talking about faith as a generalization. What I'm trying to do is look at the practicality of faith, what effect it will have on your life, and also how we can, if I say enact it, live it out, see the results. Because I hear so many people talking about faith without actually trying to explain the pitfalls, the difficulties, and yet the phenomenal results. And so I'm going to actually start on this occasion by turning all the way back to Mark's Gospel and to the well-known passage in Mark 11, where you know the story. And the story is very clear because in Mark 11, verse 12, and you do need to start looking from there, but I'm going to jump over it. It simply explains that Jesus and the disciples were coming from Bethany. And they come up and have to go over the Mount of Olives in order to go to Jerusalem. I'm very familiar with this because the main hotel that we were using all those years ago when I had the travel company was in Bethany. And the Squatter Instinct was owned by a local sheikh, and we were, I think, his main clients. And in fact, we were bringing so many people, he had to build an extension onto the hotel to accommodate us. But of course, Bethany was very significant when we stayed there because this is where Mary and Martha lived, and it was the one home that we know was always open to Jesus and where he and the disciples did spend much time. And of course, it was in Bethany that Lazarus was raised from the dead. So they were coming from Bethany, and on the way across they see a fig tree. And it says quite clearly in verse 13 that Jesus was hungry. Well, that's not unusual. And so going to the fig tree, he was looking, but didn't find the fruit that he expected, which apparently is a small early growth of fruit before the main harvest. But he found nothing but leaves. I'm going to pause for a moment here from the question of faith because I really do have to mention this. The trouble with some Christians is that they're full of leaves and there's no fruit. People can make a lot of noise, they can get very excitable, but what Jesus is looking for is not just the noise and the excitement and so on. He wants to see the reality of the fruit. Anyway, so what Jesus did, he cursed the tree and said, "No man will eat from it forever." And the disciples heard what he said. So it was the following day when they were also returning this way. In verse 20 it says, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree was dried up, right down to the roots. Now, it was Peter, and Peter was always outspoken, wasn't he? It was Peter who challenged the Lord and said, "Master, look," and in some surprise, now I want you to notice, Peter at this point was shocked and surprised because he said, "Master, just look, this fig tree is already dead." And in verse 22, Jesus answered and said to him, "So very simple, have faith in God." Now, this here symbolizes the moment that I want to talk about. Our faith is not in people. It's not in the preacher. It's not in the evangelist. Our faith has to be directly in God. And that is the point that we have to emphasize with faith. People too often are looking to, too many people look to me and think I'm some healer or something. I'm not. God is the healer. And I explain this in every evangelistic meeting. Before I pray for the sick, I explain, I am not a healing evangelist. It's Jesus is the healer, and he's the one you have to ask. Now, that was the first response. But he continued and said, now, you've noticed he says, have faith in God. But in the following verse, he says, truly I say to you, that whosoever will say to this mountain, and we're talking about the Mount of Olives, be removed and cast into the sea, and that would have been down to the Dead Sea, and shall not doubt, but shall believe that those things which he says shall come to pass, shall have whatever he says.